Hello, everybody. Oh, wow, I didn't expect to hear myself in stereophonic sound. Thank you for braving the elements to come out here to hear from my very dear friend, Darlene Superville. It's so nice to see you again, Darlene.
It's nice to see you again, too. It's been a
and,
while.
and to see you sharing the expertise that I have known you to have for
Oh,
many years.
thank you.
Darlene was the first zygote to cover the White House, and she is a very valuable member of AP's team. So, all right. So I guess we're on kind of a tight clock, so we should just get on with it.
Yep.
Do you want to read an excerpt from your book first, or do we just get into some conversation about?
Let's see what the audience would like. Conversation? Do you want to be read to?
Don't you want the mellifluous tones of Darlene's voice wafting into your ear as you describe some of the, or share some wonderful information about our Second Lady, Jill Biden?
First Lady.
Our First Lady. Our Second Lady turned First Lady.
First Lady.
You're absolutely right. Now, see, I just put a time and date stamp on my own forehead because she was Second Lady when I left off, and it just seemed in the blink of an eye she is now First Lady.
So, good evening, and thank you, everyone who's here tonight. It's great to see this lovely turnout, and thank you, Sonia, for agreeing to be the interrogator of the evening. I'm going to read from the introduction. As a teacher for more than 30 years, Dr. Jill Biden had long been accustomed to waking up in the dark. But this was something else entirely. She heard the whistle of the 5:20 a.m. Northwest Regional train break the still air as it sped by her home in Wilmington, Delaware. The winter of 2017 felt especially cold and dark. After 8 years at the highest levels of the U.S. government, Joe and Jill Biden had left Washington behind. Donald Trump was now in the White House, and the 19th century mansion on the grounds of the Naval Observatory that had served as the Bidens' home during Joe's 2 terms as vice president was occupied by the new second family, Mike and Karen Pence. But Jill continued teaching at a community college just outside of Washington that had become a second home for her, a place where she could channel her passion for education and escape the political pressure cooker. Teaching English classes at Northern Virginia Community College, which everyone calls NOVA, now required a train ride, the same commute her husband had made for 36 years to his job in the Senate. Amtrak had renamed the station in Wilmington after Joe Biden 5 years earlier in recognition of the thousands of hours he'd spent commuting. Teaching was about the only thing that could draw Jill back to Washington at the time. It was never a city she considered home, despite her husband's profession. She and the couple's 3 children had always lived in Wilmington, part of a close-knit community of family and friends. Jill had embraced her role as Second Lady, but Washington was also filled with difficult memories, most recently the loss of their son, Beau, to cancer. From Wilmington, Jill would take the hour-and-a-half ride to Washington's Union Station and then request an Uber for the 9-mile drive across the Potomac River, a trip that wound through areas of D.C. that mixed the grand and the grimy, past the Jefferson and Air Force memorials and around the Pentagon to NOVA's Alexandria campus. It was only a 20-minute ride on a good day, but Washington traffic was always bad in the mornings. She did the whole thing in reverse to get home later in the day. Despite the commitment she felt to her students, many of them immigrants and the first in their families to attend any type of college, the long commute was beginning to wear on her. Jill's time as Second Lady had brought her great joy and meaningful work. She helped lead President Obama's proposal for free community college, an ambitious plan that ultimately went nowhere in Congress, co-founded an organization to support military families called Joining Forces with First Lady Michelle Obama, and had successfully taught at Nova for all 8 years. Recent heartbreak had left Jill and Joe battered. Bo died in 2015 at the age of 46 of an aggressive brain cancer, leaving behind a wife and 2 young children. After a lengthy period of indecision following Bo's death, Joe had decided not to run for president in 2016. Hillary Clinton had run instead and lost to Trump. Their younger son, Hunter, who had long struggled with drugs and alcohol, now seemed to find his life disintegrating into hard drug use, long disappearances, and a bitter public divorce. Returning to a more private life, Jill had to relearn the rhythms of life, of driving, of walking into a store without an ever-present entourage of staff and a host of Secret Service agents. She had to learn new tools, like Uber and Venmo, to maneuver through the world. In the past, she would have found the fun in all of that. She'd always been a gleeful and lifelong learner. But Bo's loss hung heavy over her every move. She wasn't just moving on. She was moving on without her son. Quote, "Life just felt different," she said, looking back on that time during an interview in 2021. Quote, you just can't lose a child and say, "Oh, now we'll go on." Jill often turned on the early TV news as she got ready in the morning. The new administration was like nothing she had ever seen. She tried not to dwell on Trump's swift demolition of so much that Obama and her husband had built. She knew that any new president, Republican or Democrat, would have changed things done by their predecessors. She could only hope that Trump wouldn't be as bad as many had feared. Even with Joe out of politics for the first time in his adult life, they found new ways to serve. They were both devoted to cancer research. Joe met with scientists and experts, Jill with families and caregivers. They worked on establishing the Biden Foundation, which would fund initiatives on causes that had long been dear to the Bidens, like preventing violence against women and expanding access to college. She was teaching, speaking, and starting work on her memoir. It was, Jill felt, a full life, and she still had Nova. She adored her students and was deeply invested in their future. The diverse and international backgrounds of her students had opened up the world for her. Quote, "I saw this whole world at Nova," she said. "I just couldn't go back." So she made the early Amtrak train her alarm clock, knowing by the time she reached Wilmington, the gloom of night would give way to brisk morning light. Life, in its unrelenting way, continued on. I'll stop there.
Wow, that is an interesting take on Mrs. Biden. And I guess the logical point to pick up with that, where you mentioned her having been second lady and getting accustomed to this train and her commute with her job, making that transition to First Lady. Tell us a little bit more about that transition for her, what that was like for her, having been second lady for 2 terms, and then making her way over to being First Lady. I think the last one we had to make that transition was Barbara Bush.
Barbara Bush would have been the most recent one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the transition for Jill was a little bit mixed. I would describe it as a little bit mixed. She had the benefit of having been second lady under the Obama administration and First Lady Michelle Obama. She had 8 years to watch Michelle Obama carry out the duties and functions of First Lady and kind of watch and learn, if you will. But she also is, you mentioned Barbara Bush, she also is very steeped in politics. You know, Joe was a senator for a long time, so politics wasn't new to her, the White House wasn't new to her. All of the things that a First Lady would have to do, she understood all that stuff. The transition, though, was never easy because the spotlight on the First Lady shines so much brighter on a First Lady than it does on a Second Lady, and that probably took a little bit of adjusting, too.
Now, at the same time, she's First Lady with a twist, right? Because most First Ladies have a second lady, and she had been a second lady to a first lady working together. She's got a second gentleman.
Right.
How different is that?
I would say very different because we've never had a second gentleman before. And he is trying to find his own way, make the sort of define the role for himself. But she has also been able to, since she was second lady for 8 years, kind of be a mentor and guide him a little bit, help him understand some of the expectations and just what he's getting into.
Because I would imagine that might feel a little funny.
I would think so,
you know.
because I think 2 years ago, Doug Emhoff probably never thought he would be second gentleman.
Right.
He was a very successful entertainment lawyer in California, married to, then Senator Harris, and living the California life. And then all of a sudden, here he is, thrust into this new, undefined position, and he has to kind of figure out what to do with it.
I would guess logically the best person to talk to is a political spouse along the vein of Mrs. Biden. But I'm wondering where she possibly could draw the line in terms of giving advice to him from a traditionally female role, a traditional gender role, and how much of that is useful to him and how much of it he has to invent for himself.
There's a lot of it that he has to invent for himself, just like first ladies do and second ladies do. Because none of those positions come with a job description. Those roles are very much unlike being president of the United States, where you have to do certain specific things, right? You have to work with Congress, you have to sign legislation into law, you have to travel, you have to attend NATO conferences and G20 conferences and all those sorts of things. But first ladies, second ladies, second gentlemen, they pretty much have a wide runway to do what they want and to shape the position in a way that suits them. There are no job descriptions, there are no requirements. And so one of the things that we are now seeing with the second gentleman is he's finding a lane for himself in terms of being the administration's point person on fighting anti-Semitism. He's the first Jewish spouse of a president or a vice president, and he's taken on that role. I'm sure that some of it has been given to him, but it's also something that he feels comfortable doing.
Sounds like, I guess, good experience for a man to go through for this country, because we will eventually someday have a first husband.
Have a first man, yes?
First man, and that's what he'd be called, a first man?
First gentleman?
First gentleman, okay,
Maybe.
okay. All right. I'm sorry, we're fine? Okay, just making sure we're on point. Okay, so we'll get back to Mrs. Biden. Now, tell us a few things that people may not be aware of, about a few facts that people may not be aware of about Mrs. Biden.
I think most people outside of Washington probably don't realize or may not realize that she's the first lady who was able to keep the job that she had before she became first lady. She is a longtime community college professor, and she still leaves the White House 2 days a week and still is going to NOVA, Northern Virginia Community College, to teach her English and writing classes. And she's the first lady to do that. Most first ladies who had careers gave them up before they became first lady, either just before getting to the White House or sometime before coming to the White House. She's also age is just a number, but she's also the oldest woman to become first lady. She was 69 when Joe Biden took office on January 20th, 2021. Joe is not her first husband. Joe was her second husband. Many people may not realize that. And as a matter of fact, they are both each other's what I call seconds. Many of you know the tragic story of Joe Biden losing his first wife and daughter in a car accident in 1972, a week before Christmas. And Jill was married when she was still in college. The marriage lasted a few years, and then she got divorced, met Joe, and the rest is history. So those are just some of the things that I think many people may not know about her.
Now, talk to me about the way that this book came together. I think the timing on it was right along with the beginning of the Biden administration. So your relationship with Mrs. Biden was still very new, or was it? I mean, it may not have been from the second lady tenure, but tell a little more about how the book came to be and how Mrs. Biden might feel about it.
Sure. So when she was second lady, I was at the White House and covered her on occasion. So there was already some familiarity with Jill Biden. And then we got the contract to write the book about her. And that happened in 21. I think it was 20. I'm sort of forgetting.
Maybe 2020. The pandemic will do that to you.
Yes.
It did that to all of us. We don't really remember everything. Maybe 2020.
No, it was 2021. Now I remember. It was 2021. It was around March of 2021 or so. My colleague and I, Julie Pace, who was the executive editor of the Associated Press, who's not here tonight, she and I sat down and tried to figure out how on earth were we going to do this book in 6 months. We had 6 months from the publisher to do all of the reporting, the writing, and to turn in a manuscript. We divvied up interviews, figured out who we were going to talk to. We had some outside help from another writer, Evelyn Duffy, who is mentioned in the book. And we just cranked for 4 or 5 months doing interviews while at the same time keeping our day jobs. At that time, Julie Pace was in charge of the Washington Bureau of AP, so dozens of reporters, photographers, and just news breaking out everywhere in Washington every single day, every hour of every single day. And I was still at the White House trying to get used to the rhythms of the Biden administration. And so we just, when you have a deadline, you have to meet it, right? If there are any journalists in the audience. And so that's what we did. We worked nights, weekends, in between. I worked in between reporting stories. I'm sure Julie worked in between managing the Bureau. And with Evelyn's help and some other outside help, we were able to pull it off.
Now, you know, Darlene, I know you to have an encyclopedic knowledge about a lot of things. So when you got started on this book,
Yeah.
did you find a good bit of this information was already in your head and you were pulling information that you already knew, or was it a heavy research load for you, a combination of the two? How much did you surprise yourself with the vast knowledge that you've been able to accumulate, not necessarily about Mrs. Biden herself, but first ladies in general, and how much did you rely on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Some of it was there was a lot of research on some of it, particularly her early life growing up outside of Philadelphia. She grew up in a town called Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. Her sisters, her parents, her school years, her college years, a lot of that stuff we had to do some research on. And then in talking to people, we were able to fill in blanks, just like when you interview people for stories. But there were some things that, as you start thinking about what you're writing about, especially having had some familiarity with Jill Biden before, some things start coming back to you and remember things, and that was part of the process as well. So yeah.
Now, what was your relationship like with Mrs. Biden before the book, and what's your relationship been with her like since the book?
Professional. When she became First Lady, she, maybe I shouldn't say most presidents, but some officials will want to meet the reporters who are going to be on the beat, who are going to be covering them on a day-to-day basis. And early on, she did, at that time, no one was meeting in person because of the pandemic, so she did a Zoom thing with a lot of the reporters who were going to be assigned to cover her. So we got to meet her and tell her a little bit about ourselves and, just have a little bit of an introductory dialogue. I traveled with her a little bit in the first opening months of the administration, and there's actually a funny story. She did an education-related trip back to Connecticut because the new education secretary was from Connecticut, so they went back to his school. And so they toured the school, they did some remarks, and so, all the officials are standing one place at a lectern giving their remarks. The press are some distance away, listening to what they're saying, taking notes, writing on computers or whatnot. When the event is all over, the officials are led in one direction. We were being led in another direction to leave the building and to go back into the cars to wait for her so we could leave. And as we were being led away, I heard someone calling, "Darlene, Darlene." And I turned around and it was the First Lady who was calling me. So I think she remembered having seen me on the Zoom thing, and then seeing me in the small group of reporters that day that were at the school, and she just felt the need to, let me know that she knew my name or something like that.
Did that surprise you?
It definitely did,
Why?
because public officials don't usually do things like that. And that's one of the interesting and more unique things about Jill. Everywhere she goes, she says to people, "Call me Jill. I'm Jill." She doesn't say, "I'm First Lady Jill Biden," or "the First Lady's here." To everyone, she's just Jill. And she tries to be but I think she's very relatable, which is not something that you see in a lot of public officials who are often, especially in this day and age, in this age of politics that we're in, they're very guarded, very careful about what they say, and they try to keep some distance from people like you and me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But she's a little bit different in that regard.
Well, I was about to say, it's funny that you brought up that distance thing, because I and any of the journalists who covered the Clinton administration know all too well how much distance could be put between
Yes.
the press corps and the First Lady. But, so did that, in terms of where she sits in the panoply of First Ladies, and we're going to get to some questions, I promise, but let's talk for a minute about other First Ladies.
Sure.
And where she is along this fact. You've got some who were pure careerists and maybe did a hybrid thing with what they did professionally in First Lady duties. You have some who were pure, "I'm a political spouse,"
Yeah.
and that's it. And you have some who said, "I'm going to give my all to any particular cause and elevate the profile of this cause." So, among those types of First Ladies, where would you place her?
I think one of the things that she'll be remembered for is just being a very active First Lady. She's also a First Lady who, and not just as First Lady, just as a woman, she feels strongly about maintaining her identity as a teacher, and not sort of being known as Joe's wife or the senator's wife. Most of us call her Dr. B. She went to school, she has 2 master's degrees, she has a PhD in educational leadership. And so she is referred to as Dr. B. She likes to be called Dr. B. So having her that identity is very important to her, which I don't think you saw a lot of that in some of the other First Ladies.
Right,
Hillary Clinton may be more in that mold, but there are some others who were just happy being known as Mrs. So-and-so, or, First Lady so-and-so.
The Dr. B thing, that got a lot of talk,
Yes.
where she wanted to be called Dr. Biden. And other people were like, "Doctor? Can you do surgery? You're not a doctor." How does she feel about that, and what's your take on that type of thing?
As I mentioned a moment ago, she has her bachelor's degree, she has 2 master's degrees, and she has a PhD. So she went to school, she put in the work, She earned the title, and if she wants to use it, more power to her is what I say. There was someone during the transition between the two administrations who had written a column in the Wall Street Journal who took issue with the fact that she wanted to be called Dr. B or liked to be called Dr. B, and that caused a little bit of a kerfuffle before the administration got started. But there were several former first ladies that came to her defense: Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama. We were talking earlier about the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff. He came to her defense and defended her use of the title. So I think that issue is not as much of an issue anymore, but you know, I think when you have women who are accomplished as she is and as educated as she is, someone is always going to try to find some reason to try to knock them down a peg or two, and that's probably what that author was doing.
Probably.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to travel, and you've gone some places with some first ladies. You've roamed the earth with a first lady or two. If you had to choose some travel with Mrs. Biden right now, where would you go?
Well, she is going to be going to Africa at some point. President Biden had many heads of state from Africa in D.C. at the end of last year, and he promised all of them that they would get tired of seeing Biden administration officials coming to Africa this year. Treasury Secretary Yellen has already been there. She was there just a couple of weeks ago. Jill is supposed to go. The vice president will be going. The president will be going. So I'm looking forward to going to Africa when that trip is pulled together.
For all those trips. You said, and Darlene will be going.
Yes, I hope so.
Well, you know, that tends to happen.
Yes.
Tends to happen. I was with Hillary Clinton in Africa.
That's
and Bill
right.
Clinton in Africa.
That's right.
And did you go with George W. Bush to Africa?
I did go to Africa with
Okay.
George W. Bush, randomly ended up on a George W. Bush Africa trip when I was not part of the White House unit. I went to Africa with President Obama, I went with Michelle Obama, and I also went with Melania Trump.
Okay, so that's a well-traveled road for you. Now, if you had
Yes.
to chart that path through Africa for Mrs. Biden, what would be your recommendations on the places that she should see or the places that she should visit?
Kenya is usually a place where a lot of U.S. officials go. Obama went there, Michelle went there, Melania went there. It's a well-beaten path for U.S. government officials, so I would suspect that she would go there. South Africa is beautiful. Senegal, Ghana. Some of them have gone to Goree Island and the Door of No Return, where all the slaves were sent away to the Americas for slavery. That would be an interesting place for her to go as well.
But more of a sub-Saharan focus, you would say, than Northern Africa?
Probably,
Okay, that's interesting.
yeah.
That's interesting. Okay. Let's see. Before we open it up to everybody else, once this book was published, what feedback did you get from Mrs. Biden about it?
Nothing.
What? You know, has she even read it?
No news is good news in my estimation. I think if she had read it and objected to something in it, we certainly would have, Julie and I certainly would have heard that. You know, a message would have come through one of her representatives to complain about whatever they objected to. I don't know that she has read it. They've never told us that. But she is a teacher. She does read a lot of books, so I can only assume that she has read it and was okay with it. Some of her aides have read it and told us they didn't have any issues, that it was fine, you know, that sort of thing. So I think if they didn't have any issues, she probably didn't have any issues either, but I don't have any official word from the First Lady.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we're going to open it up now for your questions. I know you guys have some burning questions on your mind. I see one
I
back
will.
there. I will say we welcome your questions as long as it doesn't turn into a statement and I don't have to give anybody a smackdown here. I think we'll be good. Okay.
they address her, how they feel about having a first lady teaching these particular students. I mean, that's the thing you can put on your resume. I got taught by the first lady.
All right.
Yes, we did interview some of her students, although my colleague Julie interviewed some of her students, her former students at Nova. And one of the interesting things about her teaching is that that may have changed now that she's first lady, but when she was second lady, very few students were even aware of who she was, because again, she went by Dr. B, and some of the students didn't associate her last name with the vice president or Senator Joe Biden. They didn't put two and two together. Now, of course, that she is first lady, she has more security around her. The students have to go through metal detectors, their backpacks have to be scanned and all that sort of thing, and all those things automatically tell you that somebody important is in the building. So I think it's, now they know that she is their teacher. But for her, she has said, that once she gets in the classroom, she is their teacher. She doesn't talk politics. None of that White House stuff or politics or anything like that comes up. It's all about teaching English, teaching them writing, grading their essays, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Okay, in Canton, Ohio, there is the First Lady's National Historic Site. Have you yourself ever been there?
I have not been,
It's a great place.
but I rely on their website a lot.
Oh, okay, all right.
One of the things I love about First Lady Jill Biden, President Biden, Vice President Harris, and
Doug.
Mr. Imhoff is the fact that none of them went to an Ivy League institution for either their undergrad or graduate educations. And I think that speaks to their normalcy in a certain way. How do you think the president will deploy Dr. Biden in his I'm assuming that he's going to run for re-election. And as you mentioned, her relatability and whatnot, and given the fact that the campaign in 2020 was so cribbed given the pandemic, do you think that he will make use of her sort of every woman personality on the campaign trail?
Absolutely. During the last campaign, even though it was interrupted by COVID and there was that whole period where they were doing everything by Zoom from the basement of their home in Wilmington, but when she was out campaigning quite a bit for him, in 2020 she did something that she had never done on any of his other campaigns, and that was take a leave of absence from teaching so that she could be all in and be deployed wherever she was needed. And often you find with first ladies, they're usually more popular than their husbands, and candidates often want the spouse and not the principal to come and campaign with them. And during this last midterm campaign, she was getting a lot of requests from candidates for her to appear with them, where some candidates saw the president as somewhat toxic, I guess, because his poll numbers were so low, so on and so forth. So she'll definitely be out there again.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. It's a really great discussion. My question is, why did you personally decide to write this book with Julie? Did you take a personal interest in her story, or do you think that her story is one that is particularly worth telling and preserving?
Well, I will correct you on one thing. Julie chose me to write the book with her, not the other way around. And some of it was a matter of timing. The contract came together at that point in time where we had a new administration in Washington, a new president and first lady in the White House, and we batted around a number of ideas and settled on Jill for a number of reasons. One is that, and I think we talked a little bit about this in the beginning, is that a lot of people don't really know. We had the feeling that a lot of people didn't know a lot about her and her story and where she came from and what makes her tick. And here was this woman who is going to be representing the United States, representing her husband in some instances. And we figured it would be a good idea to try to help inform the public about just exactly who Jill Biden is. So that was one of the reasons that we decided to do the book. Another reason was that there was also very little out there that was written about her. The really only other book that we found was her own memoir that she wrote in 2019. So that was her telling her own story from her point of view. There was no reported book, no true biography, and so that was one of the things that we were aiming to do with our own book too. And you know, hopefully when elementary school students 20 years from now have to write book reports about Jill Biden, they'll turn to our book and dig up some of the history.
But that question does raise an interesting point, which is she was second lady for 8 years. How did people not know about her, more about her? I mean, did she really keep that low of a profile as second lady?
Well, there are lots of people in this country who don't know how a bill becomes law, so.
That's true. You've got a point there, my friend.
And also, when you are second lady, there's, you can operate a little more under the radar because all of the attention is on the president. Then the next big spotlight is on the first lady. And so with second lady, then there's the vice president. So it's president, vice president, then first lady perhaps, or first lady, then vice president. Anyway, all the attention goes to those three. The spouse of the vice president can just kind of, you know, chill out and do whatever they want and not be the focus of that much attention. And plus she was also teaching, so she was not in the public eye 2 days a week. She was in the classroom in college doing her teaching students, so that, you know.
Yeah, makes sense. Right here.
Hi.
Hi, Darlene.
Hi.
Congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you have any insights into Dr. Biden's role as a behind-the-scenes influencer. Her role as, is she in the room, so to speak, when the president makes big decisions?
Good question. I don't think she's in the room when he makes like super big decisions. For example, I don't think she would have been in the room or in the Situation Room when they were deciding how to pull out of Afghanistan and when to do that and how that should all be done. But I think she will pick her moments and her issues to advise him on. One thing she's very passionate about is community colleges and the advantage of attending community colleges. And there was a proposal earlier in the administration to do 2 years of free community college for anyone who wanted to go to community college, and she was very much behind that. So I could definitely see her, you know, at dinner or in the limousine or wherever they would be together, you know, Joe, how's it going with the community college thing? You know, sort of pushing him there. But on some of the other stuff, no, she doesn't really like politics, and that's one thing she told us when we spoke to her for the book. But on issues that are important to her, I think she will give him her input.
Congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
I'm really excited for you. I wanted to ask you if you could compare your experience covering Dr. Biden to her predecessor, First Lady Trump. The climate and the culture, can you kind of give us an idea of how that was for you and kind of paint a picture for us?
Sure. Where do I begin?
The Rose Garden, maybe?
The Rose Garden? Why did you mention the Rose Garden?
Why not? I mean, you know. It's a fixture. It got rearranged a little bit.
Oh, I see what you're getting at, yes. So every First Lady is different, and those two are very different. Melania was a model. Michelle is a, you know, educator, teacher. Remember, Melania also didn't come to Washington for the first 6 months of the administration, so there was a bit of a vacuum here. Nobody really the reporters who would have been covering her had she been here, we didn't have that opportunity to kind of get to know her just because she was in New York a lot. She made some appearances for certain things, but for the most part stayed away for those first 6 months. Jill, on the other hand, you know, was here from the beginning and hit the ground running pretty much on her issues. I think they were inaugurated, and I think a day or two after that, she went up to the Capitol, delivered cookies to the National Guard troops that were there. Remember the big security cordon that was there for the inauguration. And then she also went the next day to a clinic to begin her work on cancer research. So she kind of just jumped right in, feet first. Jill is very active, as I'd mentioned before. She teaches 2 days a week, but most other days of the week she's traveling. I don't know how she keeps that schedule, but she does. Melania had a tendency to do a few events, then she'd disappear for a couple of weeks. We wouldn't see her or know what she was up to, and then she'd resurface and then do some more events. I kept wanting her to do more things and just to be more active than she was, but she wasn't. She talked to us a few times. Jill Biden has talked to us a few times. So it's not as though Melania was like her husband, who just called us all sorts of names. She didn't go there. Maybe she felt that way, but she didn't express it in the same way that he would. There is little of that from this administration and this couple. They seem to respect the press and the job that we try to do every day. Does that answer your question?
Hey, Darlene, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Quick question. The State of the Union
Yeah.
address, the boo, the buzz of the kiss, was that kiss between Dr. Biden and him off that big of a deal to legitimate journalists or just social media?
Which kiss?
On the lip kiss.
Well, there you go.
Was I, yes, okay, right. Okay, did I see something that don't? Okay, all right, I'm just checking. Yeah, so when, like, I didn't know what was going to happen at the moment. When he walked in, they embraced, and there was his kiss on the lips. And that seemed to have been, I didn't think anything of it, and then all of a sudden it was a social media buzz. So, I don't know, maybe because I grew up in a black church, I'm used to that, but I don't know what that was.
Social media is its own animal, right?
Yeah, it's a dystopian world.
So going back to the earlier question about differences between Biden and Trump, we rarely saw moments of affection between Donald Trump and Melania Trump. They would hold hands, but I can't recall ever an occasion where they actually kissed or kissed on the lips. Joe and Jill are very much, you know, in love still after almost 50 years. And what they did the night of the State of the Union, they do all the time. So I'm not sure why it became a media thing. Maybe social media just needed something to talk about. It's like Rihanna at the Super Bowl, and you know, is she pregnant, is she not pregnant? Some people just have to have something to talk about or complain about or whatnot.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi.
One
Thanks for
question
coming.
thank you. One question I do have was, what was your biggest obstacle writing this book? Like one of the biggest challenges you had to face?
Probably time. 6 months seemed to be just really pretty tight to try to get it all done. And just like with any, you're probably not a journalist, but as a writer, you always wish you have more time to polish things and, you know, rephrase things or whatnot. So 6 months seemed to be a pretty short window to turn around a manuscript like that. It would have been nice to have a year.
Okay.
Hi, Darlene.
Hi,
You have a bunch of current and or former White House correspondents sitting here in your audience
I've
today.
noticed.
And I harken back to the time when women were not allowed to cover the President of the United States. They were only allowed to cover the First Lady. Now, you've seen women now able to cover any member of the administration without any eyebrow tossing at all. And you've also been a woman sitting in the front row in the White House briefing room. So things have really changed a lot. So I would like you to just share a little bit to everybody here about what it's like to be a woman covering not just a first lady, but a president of the United States as well, when we weren't always allowed to do that.
That's a great question. I do know the times that you speak of. I've been on the White House beat since 2009, and I've always had other women there. So, Sonia was there, preceded me. It's too bad we weren't in the White House booth together.
I know. They would not let that happen.
But first I should say that covering the White House is an honor and a privilege. I mean, I know it sounds corny and cliche and all that, but it really is. Every day there is history happening before your eyes, and you're there to see it and write about it and tell the world about it. It's a very competitive environment. There are more women coming on the beat. I think there was a day last week, maybe, when the entire front row, I think, was all women. And I wasn't there, but I was watching it on the live stream, and I thought, yes, all women in the front row, which was really, really great to see. But there are also moments when, it's still intimidating, right? The president is talking, and you're waiting for the moment when you can find an opening where you can start to shout a question at him before he leaves the room, which happened today with his remarks and everyone shouting, and then ended up not answering anything because everyone shouted at once and he couldn't hear the question. I'm actually pleased to see more women there. I'd love to see more people of color on the White House beat. That's something that all news organizations have to work harder at achieving. Yeah.
Any more questions? Are we done?
There's one gentleman back there. Shoot, go ahead. Really?
You've been on Twitter forever? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You've done such a great job of being very clear, concise, and not interjecting opinion into your tweeting and into your articles. You really give news. How do you see? We're going to buy your book after this. But how do you see? It doesn't feel like we're trending towards the truth and that kind of reporting. It feels like we're trending towards opinion. And I just want to thank you for that, but I also want to ask the question is, where do you see us going, and how do we get there more like you? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think we got it. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I think it's going to be a hard, it's going to take a long time to turn around from the environment that we're in now with a lot of misinformation, disinformation, outright lying going on. And some of that has to do, I think, with just the proliferation of media. Keith, you had the question earlier about social media. Anyone these days can put up a website or start a blog and start spewing out stuff, and people follow them and believe them. And I don't have the answer for how you get back to truth. The only thing that I can do and my colleagues in the audience can do is to just keep pushing out facts and just to keep doing the job that we do every day, and hope that people who want the truth, like you, will gravitate toward us and block out all of the noise that is, corroding society.
All right.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The book is Jill, A Biography of the First Lady by Darlene Superville and Julie Pace. Pick it up when you can, read it. It's a very good read. And Darlene, thank you
Thank
for
you,
taking time to
Sonia.
come out and talk to all of us and share.
Happy to.
I hope to see you again, talking about your latest book and sharing that as well. All right. Thank you, everyone, for
Thank
coming.
you.